let's say our blessing for studying Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah.
Amen.
All right, let's jump in with Zipporah on one foot. Carolyn, would you please read that for us?
I would if I could see the screen. I'm getting a message that says the meeting is being recorded. I don't know how to get out of it.
Is there something where you can click?
I don't know. It's not what it says. Oh, it says leave meeting or got it.
Click got it. Click got it.
Look, I got it.
Oh, okay. There. Thank you. I tell you, technology and I just don't get along. We just don't. So you want me to read the first paragraph there?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Zipporah was the daughter of a priest of Midian, Jethro. When Moses fled Egypt after killing an Egyptian taskmaster, he eventually married her. Midian is in modern day Saudi Arabia on the eastern shore of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Great. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm
So-
glad I could help. Thanks for your help to get me in here.
We're all here to learn things.
Yes.
So now that we have a grounding as to who Zipporah is, now we will get into the text about her. Jim, would you read Act 1, please?
Okay. When Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds, even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to break bread." Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife. She bore a son whom she named Gershom, or he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land."
Okay, and context and question 1, please.
This context, this is from a big biblical book of Exodus. After Moses kills the Egyptian taskmaster, flees from Egypt, Reuel is also known as Jethro. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
All right, thank you. So here's Act 1, where we first meet Zipporah. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
Moses could have gotten killed for killing the Egyptian. I mean, he could have gotten punished, and then that would have been quite a different ending.
Moses could have fled to an entirely different place. Instead of Midian, he could have gone somewhere else.
He could have been unkind and not help the
Yeah,
daughters.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
He could also have, if Zipporah wasn't the oldest daughter, it's possible that he could have married 2 daughters.
Yeah.
Yitro may have refused to allow Moses to stay because he might not have wanted his place to be a sanctuary. if he was fleeing from the Pharaoh. So that could have been another ending.
Did Moses ever inform Jethro that he was Hebrew?
Unclear. The text doesn't say that he did. Given that he appeared from somewhere, he would have needed to come up with some explanation for where he came from and why he left there. And the text doesn't say that he had this complicated other story. So it could go either way, and it's more likely that he just was honest about his background.
So David, is this how we find intermarriage, even going all the way that far back?
Further
Even?
Joseph married Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian woman to marry.
Okay, so that's even farther back. Okay.
Yeah. Her name was Osnat.
So it's not such a new phenomenon.
And even Esau married people who weren't from the Israelites, right?
That's true.
Okay.
David, can I add?
Sorry, it's okay.
David, can I ask you about verse 19, where they said an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds? Do we have any backstory about what that was all about? Did the shepherds attack the daughters of Yitro? I'm just curious about that piece. Do we have any background on that?
Yeah, so it looks like, based off of 16 to 17, verses 16 and 17, that the male shepherds, presumably, and the Hebrew would probably support them being male shepherds, wanted first access to the water so they could come and then go. Yeah, so that is the most likely explanation as to why the shepherds attacked. Although I'm sure that there are commentaries in Midrashim giving other explanations about it.
Isn't this similar to when Rebecca was brought to Isaac, that the shepherds also chased the women away from the well?
I was just thinking about that. I don't know. Let me see if I can find it quickly. I don't know that there were shepherds with Rebecca and Isaac. But definitely Jacob and Rachel. I happen to have done that Torah reading once or this year. But Rebecca was at the well and Rachel was at the well, and Jacob met Rachel at the well. Let's see. Just looking quickly. No, Rebecca was not chased away by anybody else. Jacob and Rachel, the situation was that there was a rock that was heavier, that was too heavy to lift single-handedly, that covered the well and kept people from falling into it. And so when Jacob gets to the well, there are male shepherds who are waiting there, and they're not watering the flock because they're waiting for the other male shepherds to come to have enough people to roll off the rock. And then Rachel shows up also, and when Jacob sees her, he develops such momentary strength that he is able to roll the rock off by himself, and then he gives water to Rachel's flock. Definitely a commonality of the well is where you go to meet people.
David, what kind of a priest are they referring to? And it said her father is a priest.
Religious leader?
Yeah, just of any religion or?
Yeah, like priest is the biblical term for like the person who helps people connect with their deity.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does the terminology imply, or anything of the surrounding stuff, the context imply that he was some sort of Noahide priest, like, for example, Melchizedek, Jerusalem
Mm-hmm.
Melchizedek? Is it the same sort of situation, or is it different?
Commentary probably speaks to that, but the context doesn't tell us one way or the other.
It's like silent on what, like, who he's a priest for, I guess.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Gabriel's referring to a situation with Abraham where Abraham, after getting involved in a local war between 4 kings and 5 kings and rescuing his nephew Lot before the cities were destroyed, Abraham has an encounter with Melchizedek, who is described as a priest of the Lord Most High. And so Gabriel's asking if Yitro is considered a priest also of God, but here the text doesn't tell us one way or the other.
David, did Reuel go through a symbolic name change to Yitro, or was this just the authors slipped up and called him one name in one line and one name in another line?
So I'm guessing that you're asking about like how Jacob had a symbolic name change,
Right,
to Israel.
right.
So I don't know what's up with the multiple names here.
There's nothing, so in other words, there's nothing significant to the name change.
No, I'll see if I can find anything on that, because that's the sort of thing that people have been asking about for the last 2,400 years, at least. So there's probably various commentaries on the matter.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to just point out, David, if I might, that that's calling it a name change is already assuming something that we don't have. I mean, from a critical point of view, there may be these 2 different narratives, one about this Reuel and one about the Yitro, and they're put together. But I don't particularly want to spend time on that myself. But it's a I don't think there's anything made about a change in name. Rather, we have these 2 kinds of stories.
Yes, that is a good point. That often when there are different names and they get conflated, that's an indication of multiple traditions of how the story went, and then somebody redacted them all into one narrative together.
Okay, that's a good enough explanation for me. Thank you, Phil.
Okay. All right. Question 2. How might Zipporah have felt about being, quote, given to Moses in marriage?
Well, that was a common practice at that time anyway, right?
Right.
So, I mean, she probably would have accepted it, I'm assuming.
Except maybe because he was Jewish, not.
Oh, that's a good point, Norma, yeah. Yeah, that might have, yeah, that could have been a little bit of a.
Question, did Zipporah know he was Jewish? Because they just talk about an Egyptian man.
So we don't know possibly. If you want.
Even if she did know that he was a Hebrew, wouldn't this not have mattered at the time, in the sense that this is before the giving of the Torah? So I wonder how much prestige there would have been between, I don't know, I guess marrying a Jewish person at this time, or like somebody from another society. I don't know if would even perceive it that way at the time period. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Mhm.
'Cause I'm not sure how other nations would have perceived the early Jewish people before the giving of the Torah anyways. I mean, this is also before the miracles that would have been associated with the Jewish people leaving Egypt in the first place.
She at least
So,
knew he wasn't from her society.
Well, there's nothing in the text that assumes that anybody knows that he's Jewish. It simply says he's an Egyptian. I mean, if he fled Egypt, he was probably wearing the clothes that he had, which were Egyptian clothing. He was just an Egyptian. And I don't think any of this mattered until later on when he sees a bush burning.
And I'm wondering, people in Midian, how they, take the Jewish factor out of it, but how they would even relate to anybody from Egypt. I mean, I don't have an idea what the distance was between the two cities, if they ever ran into people from outside of Midian. So those might be more pertinent questions than how she felt about, being given in marriage by her father.
Well, that was pretty much the practice back in those days, wasn't it? To give away your daughters.
Well, I was saying that, I mean, even this question is like a 20th century, 21st century kind of question. I mean, in this era, I don't even see that being an issue, I guess. I don't even understand why the question's here, to be honest with you.
In those days, though, wasn't there such a thing as a bride price? And when Moses came out of Egypt, did he have anything that he could use as a bride price for support?
Is that the opposite of a dowry? A bride price? I never heard of that. That would be the opposite of a dowry, right?
I think the dowry comes from the father to the son-in-law.
Right. So what you just described would be the
bride
opposite.
price is what the son-in-law gives to the father-in-law.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's like an opposite practice. I'm fascinated by that. I didn't think that existed simultaneously.
Well, if you recall, when Rebecca was asked if she would go and marry Isaac, the father was given camels full of goods. That was a bride price, in my opinion, not a dowry.
But I doubt if Moses came with any money or flocks or anything. He just ran away. So he probably came with just the clothes on his back.
Right. So how was he able to afford a bride? He didn't have a bride price to give. I don't
He
think.
didn't have to. The guy just wanted his daughter to have a husband. He had so many daughters.
Right.
Although it's kind of ironic in a sense that he wouldn't have had any resources because he was like raised as the Pharaoh's son. So I mean, you talk about wealth. If you think this whole thing through all the way back. I mean, I know at this point he's like a fugitive, but I mean, it's kind of ironic because he would have had everything. He certainly would have had a lot more wealth than these shepherds and farmers in Midian, I would think.
But he left as a fugitive and didn't
Right.
have to.
Oh, no, I realize that, but I'm just saying, it just kind of boggles my mind a little bit that, asking him for money, saying he didn't have any resources, that he came from such wealth, even though he didn't have, access to it anymore.
But this wasn't a typical two parents trying to marry off their kids to one another, and there was a financial transaction. Moses saved his daughter and his flocks. And so he's in effect repaying Moses for his kindness and his bravery.
All right, question 3. What kind of traits can we assume that Zipporah has based on her being a shepherd?
Never having been one. I don't know.
She was strong. If she managed the flock.
She was somewhat fearless to fight off marauding animals.
She definitely was a leader too. She had some leadership skills there.
He was obviously kind and took the route to help that he would normally do for probably anybody. He wasn't really the Pharaoh's son, and he had innate kindness in him. So if somebody's in trouble, I would think Moses would be there to help. Young or
She was
old.
brave too.
Mhm.
She was also very brave. Further in the story, we read that she also saved Moses' life at one point.
That's true. We'll get to that in Act 2. There was a comment in the chat about how Zipporah probably had motherly traits like caring, nurturing, protective.
I can't imagine tending a flock of sheep and having to fight somebody off so I could have them watered and fed. That would be almost it's like beyond comprehension in this day and age. So I think she was pleased with his actions. I was.
Question. Did Zipporah have any brothers, or was she thrown into the role as shepherdess because there were no boys in the family?
So she did not have brothers. She had 6 sisters.
No wonder he gave her away.
What we see of shepherds in the Bible up to this point is that it is usually males who are shepherds. Thinking of Jacob, thinking when he worked for Laban, thinking of Joseph's brothers were shepherds. Abel was a shepherd. However, we do have the example of Rachel, who was a shepherd, and she did not have any brothers. So, based off of that evidence, my guess is that it would usually be the sons who are shepherds, but if there were no sons, somebody had to take care of the sheep.
And maybe she was the oldest, David, so she got that
Yes.
job. Yes.
And it looks like her sisters were also shepherds, because in verse 16 it says the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to
Right,
draw
yeah,
water.
okay, right.
Do you think their position was any different because their father was a priest? I mean, he wasn't a shepherd. He wasn't a person of the land. He was a person of God, priest. So did that give the daughters maybe more status than just the run-of-the-mill Midianite, do you think?
Probably they had more status, but I don't know how much good that did them. Like, the sheep still had to be cared for.
Right.
They might have gotten a little bit more respect, or like been watched a little bit more carefully during religious ceremonies in Midian. You know, that they should reflect well on their father.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question. Moses and Zipporah came from different cultures and religions, as did Joseph and Asnat, who was the wife given to Joseph, who is Egyptian. What sorts of things might they have had to work out, especially once they had a child?
Whether to have their son's bar mitzvah.
Or just how to raise them.
Well, they obviously were opposite in their learning from their parents, but they had to mesh and mold to be a family and take care of the children that they had or raised.
Why do you assume they were opposite? You know, at this point, Moses was raised by Egyptians. We don't know what he knew about Judaism at this point. He was simply a shepherd.
That's true. In which case, the point remains that it would be an Egyptian Midianite
Right.
marriage, which would still be different, presumably, in some ways.
Could be.
David, since a lot of people are bringing up this issue, you know, about raising the children, all of that, and these different faiths, I mean, how far back does the halacha go as far as your lineage determining, you know, who is Jewish based on if one parent is Jewish and one isn't? Would that have applied in this time, or did that come later? Like, how did all that come up?
In biblical times, the child followed the father's culture.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Since at that time it was apparent to most people that the gods of each region were strictly of that region. So the big difference between the two would have been the Midianite gods versus the Egyptian gods. And those are the two things they have to iron out until Moses came across the burning bush.
Hmm.
David, can I ask a question about the last line where he names his son Gershom, which means I have been a stranger in a foreign land?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where this is first said? Doesn't that show up elsewhere? I don't know if it's in the Torah, but in the Haggadah. Or am I thinking about, is it what the science fiction book was, Stranger in a Strange Land, which I think probably, the saying originates back here.
I don't remember it being in the Haggadah, although I could be wrong.
Okay. But you're supposed to, is it about treating people,
Yeah,
treating strangers well because you were once a stranger
yes,
in a
that
foreign
is
land?
that is in the Torah later on. It's reportedly in there 36 times. I once tried to count them and came nowhere close to 36.
But it's in there more than once.
But it is multiple times.
Okay. All right.
So my sense is that this is the origin for this phrase. Stranger in a foreign land. The word stranger and foreign are different in the Hebrew.
So is Gershon from the Hebrew, from the Egyptian, or from the Midianite language, or all three?
Ger is a Hebrew word meaning stranger or foreigner. That having been said, ancient Hebrew, ancient Midianite, and ancient Egyptian may have been linguistically related.
So that begs the question of whether Zipporah knew that Moshe was of Hebrew descent at this point when the son was named.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this also raises questions about like Moses's ability to talk to them. Like, if he didn't grow up speaking Midianite, how close were the languages? Like, how did he make himself understood in general? But it's clear that he is a stranger in a land not his own.
But in those days, would the Midianites have traded with the Egyptians along the trade routes, so they would have somehow learned to communicate?
That seems likely. They're right across this. They're right across the Gulf of Aqaba from each other. So, and they're on the shore. So presumably the Midianites had boats and had figured out how to sail across to Egypt. And as Moses figured out, there were overland routes through the Sinai Peninsula. So that would be a good explanation as to how the Midianites understood Egyptian.
I think we might not want to read so closely into those kinds of details, given the kind of a story it is, really. I mean, we have this name Gershom, and those etymologies in the Bible, they're often treated as or regarded as folk etymologies that the rabbis make use of for their purposes, say, but that might not be the right breakdown of the words. So I looked this up, and I see Alter says, Robert Alter, the verb will take it as gimel resh shin instead of ger sham, and if it comes from geresh, then it might be a reference to banishment. And we have this kind of story. So in a funny way, it's a related story, but it comes from a different way of understanding the root.
Yeah. And that process would have been finished well before the rabbis, because the Torah was in place by the time of Ezra.
Absolutely.
But the point that first we have the name, and then we figure out why we have the name, is certainly one that could have happened.
I only mentioned the rabbis because they build on those stories
Yes.
quite a lot. That's really all I meant. I didn't mean
Yes.
to say that.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes. Once we get to Midrash, then we have even more fun with this game. All right.
That's amazing.
Recognizing
Time.
the time, I want to pose a question. We have 12 minutes left, and we still have 2 more acts plus an epilogue. Do we want to zip through this, or do we want to draw this one out a little bit more and then come back to it next week?
Next week.
I like that.
Next
Think
week.
about it.
All right.
Next week.
Yeah.
Next week.
I would like that.
Okay. Great. So what other noticings do we have from Act 1?
I've noticed they don't mention the second son, Eleazar, or Eliezer.
Yes.
And from my research, it seems like Gershom is the father of 2 important characters. However, Eliezer has no children. So I wonder if they left him out because of that reason.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So somewhere between Act 1 and Act 2, there's another kid who clearly is not so important as to be named now, or in the next act. So it would make sense that someone who is a lesser character would get less attention in their beginnings.
But we don't know how much time there was between the 2 births, so it could have been quite a while.
Yeah.
Gershom doesn't really have much of a role in the desert. You know, you would think that maybe he would have been considered more to be a successor as opposed to Joshua.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That Gershom was never enslaved in Egypt where Joshua was. So that experience might have something to do.
Also, Moses doesn't give the blessings to his sons the way that Jacob or Joseph does.
Mm-hmm. Right. That is the challenge when your father is in charge of the entire community and not just in charge of your family. You don't get that same sort of relationship.
It's different than Jacob and Isaac and Aaron, where you had a line of succession with the successor playing a prominent role.
Mm-hmm.
David, since people want to stretch, I'll have a question for you to stretch. Where is Aaron during all of this? I mean, I know Aaron pops back in the story at the burning bush, but is he involved at all in Moshe's fleeing to Midian and marrying Zipporah and all of that stuff? Does he factor in it at this period at all?
That's a good question. So what the text tells us, contrary to what Prince of Egypt would like us to believe, since that's just a cinematic midrash, the text tells us that Moses, when he was up to the first 2 or 3 years, Moses was with his family, and then he grew up in the palace, and it says, so then we say, the text says, Vayigdal Moshe, and Moses grew up, which it's a little hard to tell exactly how many years that encompasses, but it seems likely that we're talking about multiple decades here. He went out to his kinsfolks and witnessed their labors, and then he kills the Egyptian, and then the next day he hears that this is known, and then after that he runs away. So he does not meet Aaron at this point. After the burning bush, when Moses protests and says, I am slow of speech, then God says, your brother Aaron will meet you. Even now he's on his way, and he'll talk for you. So Aaron doesn't meet Moses as an adult until after Act 2.
Thank you, David. I was just wondering about all that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Also, something else to think about is the timing and the aging here. So we don't have all the pieces that we need, but what we do know is that Moses dies at age 120, and that the Israelites spend 40 years in the desert wandering, and that I think that they spend like another year or two after they leave Egypt before they get to the point where they're spending 40 years. So for those of you who are retired, it may be interesting to note that Moses doesn't embark on his main career of saving the Jewish people until he's 80-ish, 78 maybe. So thinking about how long he spent in Midian and how old he is, and like how old he was when he left Egypt, like we don't know how old he was because all the Torah says was Vayigdal Moshe, and Moses grew up sometime after this. So like he may have had 40 years in Midian with Zipporah and with his kids. So that's not how I usually picture it, but the text does seem to suggest that.
Do we know anything about the boys' ages when they go back to Egypt?
We'll see in Act 2 that they ride on a donkey with their mother. So it would be possible that they were young, or at least not old enough to be expected to walk all the way through the Sinai Peninsula.